In the beginning of Exodus, the Israelites are living in Egypt, where they have been enslaved by the Egyptians. A new Pharaoh, who does not remember Joseph, comes to power and fears the growing number of Israelites. To control the population, Pharaoh orders the Hebrew midwives to kill all newborn Hebrew boys. However, the midwives fear God and do not follow Pharaoh's orders, allowing the boys to live. Pharaoh then commands all his people to throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River. During this time, a Levite woman gives birth to a son and hides him for 3 months. When she can no longer hide him, she places him in a basket and sets it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter finds the basket and adopts the baby, naming him Moses. Moses grows up in Pharaoh's palace but is aware of his Hebrew heritage. One day he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew and kills the Egyptian, hiding his body in the sand. The next day Moses sees 2 Hebrews fighting and tries to intervene. One of them asks if Moses will kill him as he killed the Egyptian. Realizing his deed is known, Moses flees to Midian. In Midian, Moses helps the daughters of a priest named Jethro, who invites him to stay. Moses marries Jethro's daughter, Zipporah, and becomes a shepherd. Meanwhile, the Israelites in Egypt continue to suffer under slavery. God hears their cries and remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. One day, while tending the flock, Moses sees a burning bush that is not consumed by the fire. God calls to him from the bush and tells him to remove his sandals, for he is standing on holy ground. God reveals himself to Moses and tells him that he has seen the suffering of his people in Egypt. He commands Moses to go to Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites. Moses is reluctant, doubting his ability to convince Pharaoh. God reassures him and gives him signs to perform, such as turning his staff into a snake and making his hand leprous and then healing it. Moses still hesitates, so God appoints his brother Aaron to speak for him. Together, they return to Egypt to confront Pharaoh. In Exodus 5, Moses and Aaron approach Pharaoh, asking him to let the Israelites go to hold a festival in the wilderness. Pharaoh refuses and increases the Israelites' labor, making their lives even harder. The Israelites blame Moses and Aaron for their increased suffering. Moses questions God, who reassures him that he will compel Pharaoh to release the Israelites with a mighty hand. In Exodus 6, God reiterates his promise to deliver the Israelites from slavery. He reveals his name, Yahweh, to Moses and assures him that he will fulfill his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses and Aaron are instructed to speak to Pharaoh again. Despite their doubts, they obey. God tells Moses that he will harden Pharaoh's heart, so that he can perform many signs and wonders in Egypt. In Exodus 7, Moses and Aaron perform miracles before Pharaoh, turning Aaron's staff into a serpent. Pharaoh's magicians replicate the miracle, and Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. God instructs Moses to meet Pharaoh by the Nile and turn its waters to blood. The fish die and the river stinks. Pharaoh's magicians replicate this plague, and Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. In Exodus 8, God sends a plague of frogs. Pharaoh's magicians replicate it, but Pharaoh promises to let the Israelites go if the frogs are removed. When the frogs die, Pharaoh hardens his heart again. God sends gnats, which the magicians cannot replicate. They tell Pharaoh it is the finger of God, but Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. God then sends a plague of flies, devastating Egypt but sparing Goshen. Pharaoh offers to let the Israelites sacrifice in Egypt, but Moses insists they must go into the wilderness. Pharaoh agrees but hardens his heart once the flies are gone. In Exodus 9, God sends a plague on the livestock, sparing the Israelites' animals. Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. God then sends boils on the Egyptians, but Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. God sends a hailstorm destroying crops and livestock. Pharaoh admits his sin and promises to let the Israelites go. But once the storm stops, he hardens his heart again. In Exodus 10, God sends locusts, consuming what the hail left. Pharaoh admits his sin again but hardens his heart once the locusts are gone. God then sends darkness for 3 days, but Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. Pharaoh offers to let the Israelites go if they leave their livestock. Moses refuses and Pharaoh expels him, threatening death if he returns. God tells Moses that one more plague will compel Pharaoh to release them. In Exodus 11, God announces the final plague, the death of the firstborn. The Israelites are instructed to ask the Egyptians for silver and gold. God grants them favor, and they leave with great wealth. In Exodus 12, the Passover is instituted. The Israelites mark their doors with lamb's blood to be spared from the final plague. At midnight, the firstborn in Egypt die, and Pharaoh finally lets the Israelites go. The Israelites leave Egypt, taking Joseph's bones with them. In Exodus 13, God leads them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. They avoid the Philistine rout, fearing war. Exodus 13 begins with God instructing Moses to consecrate every firstborn male among the Israelites, both human and animal, as they belong to him. This act is a reminder of how God spared the firstborn of Israel during the final plague in Egypt. Moses then tells the people to remember this day, the day they came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought them out with a mighty hand. They are to celebrate this day annually by eating unleavened bread for 7 days. God leads the Israelites through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. He goes before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night to give them light. When Pharaoh's army pursues them, God parts the Red Sea, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. In Exodus 14, the Egyptians follow, but God causes the sea to return to its place, drowning Pharaoh's entire army. The Israelites witness God's power and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Exodus 15 contains the Song of the Sea, a hymn of praise sung by Moses and the Israelites, celebrating their deliverance from Egypt. Miriam, Moses' sister, leads the women in dance and song with tambourines. The Israelites travel through the desert of Shur for 3 days without finding water. They come to Marah, but the water is bitter. God shows Moses a piece of wood to throw into the water, making it fit to drink. In Exodus 16, the Israelites grumble about the lack of food. God provides quail in the evening and manna in the morning. He instructs them to gather only what they need for each day, except on the 6th day when they gather twice as much for the Sabbath. The Israelites continue their journey and camp at Rephidim, where there is no water. They quarrel with Moses, and God instructs him to strike a rock with his staff, bringing forth water for the people to drink. In Exodus 17, the Amalekites attack the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses, with Aaron and Hur's help, keeps his hands raised to ensure Israel's victory. Joshua leads the Israelites in battle and defeats the Amalekites. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, visits the Israelite camp in Exodus 18. He advises Moses to appoint capable men as leaders over the people to help judge their disputes, easing Moses' burden. In Exodus 19, the Israelites reach Mount Sinai. God calls Moses to the mountain and makes a covenant with the people, promising to make them a holy nation if they obey his commands. The people agree to do everything the Lord has said. God descends on Mount Sinai in fire and smoke, and the mountain trembles. He gives Moses the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, outlining the fundamental laws for the Israelites to follow, including prohibitions against idolatry, murder, theft, and adultery. In Exodus 21, God provides additional laws regarding servants, personal injury, and property protection. These laws ensure justice and fairness within the community. Exodus 22 continues with laws about social responsibility, including restitution for theft, protection of property, and moral and ceremonial principles. These laws emphasize the importance of integrity and compassion. In Exodus 23, God gives laws about justice and mercy, Sabbath rest, and the 3 annual festivals. He promises to send an angel to guide and protect the Israelites as they enter the Promised Land. Exodus 24 describes the ratification of the covenant. Moses builds an altar and offers sacrifices. The people affirm their commitment to God's covenant, and Moses sprinkles them with the blood of the covenant.